Hello and welcome to Platzforma, a podcast about ideas, politics, activism, culture and society. I'm your host, Vitalijs Pranchana, and in this episode I'll be talking to Iskra Krstić, journalist and researcher, and Juhász András, journalist, both of them from the Serbian left-wing news website Mašina. Our discussion is centered on the ongoing protests in Serbia. On November 1st, 2024, at the main railway station in Novi Sad, Serbia, the concrete canopy of the building collapsed suddenly, killing 16 people and injuring another person. Students from various Serbian universities started to organize protests, demanding for accountability from authorities regarding the incident. Their anger was further fueled by the fact that the railway building was recently renovated as part of a Serbian-Chinese project. On November 22 last year, a protest by students from the Faculty of Dramatic Arts at the University of Belgrade, gathered to honor the Novi Sad victims, was attacked by a group that included high-ranking members of the ruling Serbian Progressive Party. Several days after this incident, the students started a blockade of the faculty, an action that was replicated by other faculties and universities across the country. Later, the protests were joined by other groups: teachers, workers, activist groups from other parts of Serbia. With my guests, I will try to explore questions such as: what is the constituency of the protests? In terms of social forces, classes, what is the structure of the protest? Leaders, organization, messages? To what extent these protests are a case of politics as usual that we have seen in other parts of the world and refers to protests against corruption, against the bad capitalism that end up being co-opted by the establishment, or a case of really transformational political practices that are changing at a deep and structural level the way politics is being done in Serbia. Our podcast was recorded via Zoom. My first question is about setting up, in a way, the historical context in which the whole situation with the current protests in Serbia are happening. So I'm old enough to remember the events of 2000 when Slobodan Milošević was expelled from power after large protests. I remember I was a student at Sofia University in Bulgaria, and I was studying political science, and there was even a book by some Otpor members, and it was very popular. And I don't remember, did I read it during my student years or a little bit later after that, but it was very popular, and it was like how to stage almost a revolution, and it was talking about how this group of people have saved Serbia and have kind of expelled the dictator and have installed democracy. It's kind of a paradox that after one dictator was removed from power in 2000. Now the country is the president of the country is the former Minister of Information of Milošević.
I think that there might be a misconception in the general public about how Milošević was ousted. And this has been a matter of debate throughout the last 25 years. Especially in the last 10-ish years or so, during which we have witnessed a rise of politicization and mobilization in our society. On the side of the appearances, Milošević seemed to have been thrown by a singular event of a big demonstration which took place in front of our parliament and was very media friendly. It seemed like a spectacle of democracy, and it was later reproduced. These videos of these scenes were later reproduced in Hollywood movies also to become a kind of a paradigmatic image of a dictatorship ousting. But meanwhile, several other stuff, apart from the large mass of people gathering in front of a parliament, contributed to the fall of Milošević. One is obviously the fallout of Milošević's politics with the mainstream politics, or the ethos of the mainstream politics of the time. So maybe in more colloquial terms, Milošević didn't have the support of the international community. And the opposition, which worked to throw his regime down, on the other side had, in more ways than one. So the reason why Milosevic didn't have support of international actors, and the reason why he also, and this is the second point, lost support of some influential internal actors, such as economic actors, is the fact that he was stalling economic integration of Serbia. So he kept Serbia isolated, and this was immediately inconvenient for the outside actors, while being, for the first few years, convenient for the inside economic actors who gained leverage through privatizations, but became inconvenient in the late 90s. So we believe that there were a lot of economic actors in the late 90s who came by enough, who accumulated enough wealth that it had become convenient for them, for Serbia to open up economically. And they also supported the opposition and the changes. So when the big protests in 2000 erupted, in the year 2000 erupted, what the difference between them and the protests that were going on for 3 months, 3 or 4 years before that, was, I believe, the interests of domestic economic actors for the integration of Serbia's economy into international economy. And what we have now is the opposite in that respect, because the international powers and the domestic economic actors benefit largely from the way Vučić and his party have been leading economic policy and politics in Serbia. And this, in this respect, the dogmatic approach to neoliberal policies and the attraction of so-called foreign direct investments, so basically subsidizing foreign corporations and a wholesale of Serbian resources are some of the major, is the basis basically of their economic politics.
Just jump in here to emphasize this fact that Iskra was now mentioning. It's even in this, privatization wholesale of Serbia and giving large subsidies to foreign corporations, even as destructive this kind of economic policy by itself is, there is this other aspect, I think, that Serbia came too late to the transitioning table. Transitioning meaning moving from Yugoslav market socialism to capitalism proper and liberal democracy. So in the coming years, from 2000 till 2012, when Vučić's party first came to government, in these 12 years, the promise of transition, the promise of foreign direct investment, of privatization didn't really pay off. The living standards didn't improve astronomically. Serbia didn't become a member of the European Union, which was an important political motive in that first decade after Milosevic, and this led to widespread dissatisfaction with the European or Western style of governance.
If I'm trying to summarize what you said, and I would like you to correct me if you think that I'm not getting something right, that in 2000 there was a particular constellation when there was internal dissent, but also the alignment of, on the one hand, interests of foreign actors, but also powerful business interests at home. And the difference, as I understand it, is that right now the internal powerful actors and the external forces, EU and others, are kind of okay with Vučić, but the people is not okay with Vučić. Am I right in saying that this is the biggest difference between these two protests or two situations?
I would say yes. So yes, that the big political and economic actors, both on the inside and the outside, are mostly in favor of the way Vučić's party has been leading our Serbia's economic politics, and the people is dissatisfied with Vučić even more than it was dissatisfied with Milošević in 2000. The 2000 demonstrations was immediately after the bombing of the then Socialist Republic of Yugoslavia, so basically Serbia and Montenegro. And the famous demonstrations, the famous mass protest in which Milošević fell, on the day that he fell, attracted, we used to say 500,000 people, but actually, it's maybe just 100,000. In these protests, for the last 5 months, we have had larger protests than that on several occasions. So we had 100,000 people in the streets in late December, and we have at least 350,000 people on the streets on the 15th of March. So the demonstrations are larger, and not because Serbia's population grew. On the contrary, it's smaller now. So this is the scale, so to say, of the dissatisfaction of of people by Vučić in comparison to the dissatisfaction of people by Milošević. I think such an analogy is solid. But what we have also as a contributing factor is the fact that the opposition in the 90s had more support by the people, mostly due to the fact that they hadn't yet been to power. And now we have an opposition which is partly assembled from the small fractions of the parties that used to rule the country after Milošević fell, and some parties that grew out of urban and environmental activism. But none of them have the trust of the people. So this is what is dark.
I would just point to a statistical fact I found really intriguing. It's the so far largest protest in Serbian history on the 15th of March this year. So there were at least 300,000 on the street. Iskra and I usually say that it's 500,000. I don't know who is right here. It was spectacularly big. And so you have this situation, it's like 5% of the country's population is on the street in the capital. And at the same time, the opposition parties are polling between 2 and 4%. This gives a good sense of how the opposition, the parliamentary opposition, is standing at the moment, and how, in some sense, intriguing this political situation is. And this is definitely a big difference, right, between the current situation and the situation we had around the fall of the Milošević regime. So this question of the political horizon. I think that in the late 90s, and in the early 2000s, the kind of the political horizon of the population who wasn't in agreement with Milošević was more narrow and more defined, more westward looking. At least there was enough power to shape the dominant narrative as a westward looking, liberal, democracy oriented politics. And now this political horizon, I would say that it's quite open. You know, there are some analysts who are emphasizing the nationalist moment in it, some analysts on the left who are emphasizing a middle class character in it. I personally I'm not in agreement with these analyses, although they do have, I mean, the points that they are using to develop their argument are valid. So we do have nationalist elements, we do have middle class elements in the current student and popular movement, but also there is this widely spread dissatisfaction with at least the political system, and there is this very strong, and at least for me, unexpected belief that direct democratic principles can yield good politics in this moment. So there is a trust currently, for me at least, an unexpected trust in direct democratic principles, which I think gives at least some potential of openness to the political horizon of this moment. And also, especially in the last month, there is more and more mention of working class questions of the workers coming from the students. So like the student movement extended a call towards the trade union to organize and fight for worker rights. And more than once, the student movement has stated as an official stand that they will always support the workers of Serbia. So there are these, for me, a bit unexpected political moments appearing in this moment.
I would just maybe add that I believe that in the moment when Milosevic fell from power, the opposition was able to articulate both the dissatisfaction of those who were against the war that Milosevic led, and those who were only dissatisfied because he had lost the wars. Because we had a big protest in '96 when after the war in Bosnia, and we had the protest in 2000 after Kosovo and Metohija were practically lost, and after the bombing. So it would be really nice if only the progressive forces were leading the protests always, but it's always a constellation of actors. And in this is also different because, and in the moment when Milosevic fell, a lot of the issues that people had with his rule were the same as today, like the violence, the repression, the poverty. But some were also more, I would say, about values. And today, this is the opposite. Like the dissatisfaction of the people with Vučić's regime is a dissatisfaction with a kleptocracy. And this is also what brought so many people to the streets from all parts of the political spectrum, because people I don't remember the statistics, but there's a high rate of risk of poverty and exclusion in Serbia. We are one of the most the states in the continent with the most socioeconomic disparities between certain classes, and like the violence of the ruling party and its clients is so huge that it attracted also tens of thousands of people on the streets in 2023 in the protests that were specifically dubbed Serbia Against Violence. So this is like the red line that many people say that this isn't a question of ideology anymore. It's just a question of whether they will continue killing people and without punishment.
A lot of the things that you are mentioning are applying to a very, very, very large extent to Moldova, although the situation here is very different. So, for example, I would say in my country, I can say there is definitely also this delusionment with the whole political order, but there is no looking for alternatives, as I've read that the students are doing. So in a way, we also have this situation where, how to put it, parties are better when they're in opposition, very competent and very confident on whatever when they're in opposition. And once they're in power, they prove to resort to the same practices, more or less. So, but in Chisinau, in Moldova, for example, the solution is just to have this alternate this party. So it's still we're kind of within the situation. And what was interesting for me when I was reading about, I read a little bit of Serbian, not a lot. I've studied Bulgarian and I kind of understand. I know other Slavic languages, but at least there was this discussion about the failure of the political system being taken seriously, also by the students. And there was this. So for me, this is why, in a way, these protests are very, very, very much interesting, because they're not hiding that. They're not trying to kind of hide it behind, for example, another iteration of the EU versus Russia or civilization. But it's like, really, let's face the situation. Representative democracy, parliamentary democracy, which used to be in a way, the cure for everything, doesn't work. And let's imagine other forms. I have another question that would be, for me, very interesting, and also for my listeners, it would be like also kind of an explainer. What are the causes of these protests? And moreover, how did a protest about a catastrophe in Novi Sad became a national protest? How it succeeded to galvanize and to attract all these groups that you, Iskra, mentioned, all these interests, the constellation of all these forces that some of them maybe were not doing politics at all, or were not interested in politics at all, or not active in party movements or whatever. Some of them also not concentrated only in the capital.
Just maybe half an hour ago, my sister posted on Instagram her biggest, she calls it political mistake, or a mistake in political judgment. Because on the 1st of November, 5 months ago, when the awning fell, she posted on Instagram, like, they can really make us, into meatballs, and again we will say nothing. So for a part of the population, and I would say at the analytics too, this is a huge surprise. Now we can track down correlations, like how it came to this, and it came to this because it was a huge. The fact that the awning fell and squashed 15 people dead on the spot was so bodily awful. And the fact that the politicians who are on the top of this pyramid of responsibility more or less laughed and tried to put it under the rug really offended a lot of people who are otherwise mellow and like trusting in the institutions. This is, for some reason, this has been the last drop in this bucket of what's it called, like toxic material that has been over flooding. We've heard this for a lot of people, that it was just a moment. Although it has been a moment in a long line of so-called scandals and affairs. People have died a month ago, like 6 months ago, a year ago, 3 years ago, in terrible accidents. And people were like shocked, but it didn't amount to half a million people on the streets. But this, for some reason, this was so bodily experienced that and that the people went out. On the other hand, this is just one we will see what will it amount to. But this is one in a line of mass expressions of dissatisfaction that we had in the last 10 years, and especially the last 5 years. So the first in the 2000, after Milosevic fell, we had almost complete depolitization and demobilization, and it lasted for some 10 years. And then when they agreed, and when the ruling party agreed to build the Belgrade waterfront project, which is allegedly 3 billion euros worth of investment of ruining the city center, we had maybe 20,000 people on the streets. And from then on, from 2018, so to say, from the protests against mini hydropower plants, and then the protests against the polluted air, the protests against large-scale mining in Serbia and turning Serbia into a mining colony, and the protests against violence, we have had more and more people on the streets with each coming wave of protests. And each wave of protests lasting longer. And this is really like when you look at it as a correlation, it seems like some kind of a law of physics, you know. So every next time more people will come out, and for some reason, and this is where I entered the field of, let's say, our own surprise. Although nothing crucial happens after every wave of protests, people don't go home and become totally depoliticized and lose interest. But next time they come in bigger numbers.
If you read the comments on Instagram, is the most popular social network currently in Serbia. So if you read the comments on Instagram, you can very easily find that, you know, one person posts, "Oh, I'm dissatisfied," and then you have 100 comments either mocking that stance or saying you cannot be dissatisfied, change cannot be reached in 3 weeks or 3 months, it takes more time, you have to get your act together. So it's really transformation in morals in comparison to the decade before.
But so we can correlate now all these we can correlate all these happenings, but we are also in a sphere of contingency because we didn't expect this to last this long. Nobody, I would say, expected the protests to overcome such obstacles as New Year's holidays, like you know, the kids break in the winter. I don't know. Now the spring, the fact that everybody who is immediately involved is under so much pressure. We now have teachers in elementary schools who have been the second, so to say, column of these protests the whole time, because they had been in protest for several months when the students' protests started.
Middle schools also, not just elementary.
Elementary schools and middle schools, and we have universities and teachers in protest, and they are now beginning to be punished by losing pay. So they are paid $0 or like $2, and somehow this still hadn't broken the camel's back of the protest. So I think we agree that it is surprising.
Yeah, and it even led to solidaristic action. So it was really fascinating to see that once the government announced that they will cut the striking teacher salaries for I don't remember how many percent, a group of IT experts set up a platform for solidaristic support of the teachers in a matter of days, right? In a matter of days. And they perfected it in the upcoming week or two, and the platform managed to collect a very impressively high sum of money to substitute these losses of salaries.
It's almost paradoxical to see, and I'll quote here Boris Budin. I remember reading his essay, not referring to these protests, but referring to our whole transition and how we were put back in class to learn democracy. And when you are saying students mobilizing, teachers and so on, refusing a political order that they consider unjust, and I'm comparing that to almost lack of protests on the other side of the ocean, where there's some processes that I will not say similar, but there is really an increased authoritarianism, and there is this movement, this solidarity, these IT guys coming and setting up solidarity support. So it's always interesting, and I guess you're also discussing that probably within your circles. It's like not ironical and paradoxical, but in a way it's a removing of the faces, of the kind of falling of the masks like the theatrical mask that were covering, like the empire was projecting an image outside, and now we see that people that would fight for democracy, they're somewhere else and they're fighting. Sorry for this parallel. I thought it's very necessary. I have not a curiosity, but I'd like to ask you about the structure of this protest. You started already to mention something. What is the structure of the protest? What are the leaders, if there are any? How the protests are organized? What are the key messages? Because it's kind of, from outside, it's a very weird, but in the good sense. It's a very kind of a weird structure or no structure. And how would you explain it from the inside?
Yeah, that's the best part. It doesn't have leaders, and this is like almost. I think for people who are not otherwise don't deal with political analysis, it seems almost magical, like some kind of Deus ex machina happening, like some kind of collective consciousness, and probably a lot of conspirational theories will come out of this also. I would go just a step back to say that in these 10 years, a lot of progressive activist groups have emerged either from the university or from a dire need of people to organize in the local. And they have been analyzing the situation, and like you did, connecting the dots and putting it in the larger context of the European politics and Russian politics and geopolitics in general, and the mainstream trends in this world of ours. And some of it has obviously grown roots, and we can see that in the phraseology of students' groups. And now also citizens' assemblies, which have been gathering now for the whole 2 weeks, successfully so far, which is another surprise. So we hear phrases such as, in Serbian, it's literally investor urbanism. It's urbanism catered to the needs of developers, but we call it investor urbanism. And now we hear the phrases that were coined by local activists 10 years ago. We hear them in the assemblies like a part of everyday speech. Like a common sense. Some progressive phrases and some progressive tools or ways of thinking have become commonsensical in at least part of the population, and this is one of the most maybe surprising things. Probably there were, because we're not students. We will have another podcast with a student later, and she'll explain more how it looks on the inside in the universities. But when students began organizing in late November, after they were physically attacked while standing in silence in commemoration for the victims of the Novi Sad awning falling, they immediately organized themselves in assemblies in particular faculties called plenums, in which they make decisions through direct democracy. And it was kind of comical. You could stand in awe, and all. It was also kind of comical from the start, because they literally, like some kind of new species, they invented working groups for particular matters, such as technical matters on the faculty, and they vote for everything. And this has spread out throughout several universities in Serbia. So it has been the common way of thinking and doing things for tens of thousands of students in Serbia, which are now the most active political force, which attracts 85% of popular support. So behind them, we probably have a multiplication factor, because they go to their parents and they explain how things are done. They go to their friends and family and explain direct democracy. So I think that in that respect, we still have to wait and see what actually comes out of this. And this is the structure. There's two. I would say that there are two pillars. One is the obvious, the students. So it's called the students' protests, and they are the most active force. They bring about decisions. They decidedly have no leaders and no PRs, and sometimes even refuse to give their names to the media. And they are supported by probably by their families, but by a larger population. I would say part of it is a kind of surprising effect of the networks of support that the people of Serbia have been forced to make throughout these last 30 years in lack of institutions. So with crumbling institutions. I mean, we can support this. We can back this up by sociological research. But at the same time, for decades, we have had high levels of anomia and distrust in the society. But individualism is something that is kind of still regarded as imported. And this is maybe the upside of conservatism in Serbia. This collective, the idea of a collective.
So you mentioned that the students are one pillar, right? Mm-hmm. And then we could, I don't know if you agree, but we can also say that another pillar would be the already established local movements, right? Like the ecological movement in certain localities, or for example, in the city of Kraljevo, we have a movement which has a parliamentary role. They were already in the local assembly as just proper politicians, but they enjoy huge local support, and this initiative is accepted by also by the students. So there are these already established either activist or political groups. And would you say that there is something more to the structure?
I would say that a lot of the fact that this is still going on is due to the protests of the workers in the sector of education.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, you would say that it's also
I would say that it is largely a contributing factor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's not covered in the media that much. It's mm-hmm. not that attractive for the cameras.
Yeah. Yes.
It's not performed. It's not performative as
Yes. And it's interesting when you mention media. I didn't, now because of my day job, I cannot spend countless of hours scanning different media outlets, but some of the mainstream reporting I have seen, based on them, I got the sense that now you can really see like the ideological lens of mainstream media. Like there are these blind spots for them. They just don't know how to deal with the direct democratic part, with the striking teachers part. So for mainstream coverage, it seems to me that mostly this question of like an expert, transition government, possible elections. These are the questions that they perceive as relevant questions that they are trying to tackle. And this is only one part of the story. So within the student movement, there are also factions which are in favor, at least to our knowledge, which are in favor of a technical or expert government that would constitute a transitionary government towards fair elections and reintroducing some basic principles of rule of law. But mainstream media, it seems to me that usually sees only these spots. So that's one interesting thing. And the other interesting thing I wanted just to throw in is related to this direct democracy. At least to my ears, if I would hear students are doing direct democracy, I would imagine a proper leftist movement, some anarchist or whatever. I would expect that kind of language, but it's not present at all. The students published a manual for organizing these plenary sessions that people can use to organize their own assemblies locally. It's very, very simple and technical. It's like, you create a Viber group, you call your people and tell them to call their people, and then you go to Canva because it's free and you make the poster, and then you post the first meeting, and then when you're all there, you elect that, and that, and then you decide like that, and that's like very very down to earth, very technical. It doesn't seem that there are some big, discussions of what does direct democracy mean, how should one go about it. Quite technocratic.
Yeah, egalitarianism is implied. It's implied, and it's a really, PhDs will be written about this in bulks, Perhaps we're also, because we're older, we don't get a part of what's going on immediately in the university.
But I have no idea.
Part of it, like this egalitarianist spirit, is implied. And it goes without saying, like, we're all the same. And this also resembles what you see on Instagram, like with all the self-help manuals and this wave of self-realization and psychotherapy that's been present around for 10 years. So maybe this is the decisive factor for the Gen Zs, and the overall disenchantment with authorities and the clear structures and their sometimes arrogant attitude of entitlement and disrespect probably helps a lot. We don't know. We can speculate, but it's interesting that it's happening in Serbia, and usually we're used to only bashing Serbia for being conservative and only bashing both the people and our governments in almost all periods for not being progressive enough, etc. But there have been some cases in history which the students have also put up as good examples, and some points in history when Serbia has been progressive for the then times, and one of it is the moment when a constitution was made in the mid 19th century, one of the first constitutions which abolished slavery and introduced this kind of egalitarianism. And the egalitarianism in Serbian society and the high value of collectives in Serbian society has been also highly criticized by different theoreticians as something preventing the real liberal democracy taking place and a proper hierarchy of a liberal democratic state establishing, you people, you're I don't know, like hobbits, you need to, you only want to work your fields and talk between each other, and you hate all kinds of elites. And I'm just wondering if some small fraction of this mentality is contributing to it would be really funny. I don't know. If not comical, then really nice contribution, nice postmodern hybrid of 19th century Serbian egalitarianism and Gen Z not giving a fuck.
It could be a very weird hybrid that one with 19th century conservatism, but 19th century conservative social progressivism in a way, and Gen Z not giving a fuck. You've mentioned so many things that deserve in themselves really a large discussion. One is about the mainstream media and how it depicts such movements. We've had our experience in Moldova on a smaller scale, but we're trying also to experiment with leaderless and horizontal protests, and the media would come. So there will be journalists with microphones. Please give us a face, give us somebody to talk to us, who is the leader? And for them later unable to describe the protest because the protests have to be associated. You have to find some figures, and then you talk about these figures, and that in a way transfer the image over the protests. So that's a large discussion. Unfortunately, we cannot have it now for due to lack of time. Also, Iskra, what you mentioned seems to me extremely relevant about these invisible networks of support that in a way have actually, although they were invisible, but they did the hard work of keeping the society alive during these neoliberal transformations. And in time, underground, they have developed and they have helped people survive in the context of crumbling formal institutions, lack of involvement of the state, this dismantling of the welfare state. So that also is a great discussion, and I would really connect it here with what you're saying about this kind of, I don't want to call them traditional values or traditional mindsets or mentalities, but sometimes I think we give to the traditionalists the right to describe the past in the way they want and to use it against us. But in a way, tradition is also being reinterpreted. And if this model of coexistence has worked and it's proving to still work, why not to, we lack a word for that, but I liked your point. Since we're kind of approaching the end, I would like to ask you two more questions put into one. I've read a lot about this protest mostly in English, some in Serbian, and the opinions were, I can describe them as falling into two camps. One camp is in a way minimalist. Yeah, the protests are showing something, but it's only process oriented. There is no larger vision. Like they will, in a way, politics more of the same. While others were saying on the contrary, like this is not only process oriented, prefigurative politics first tried or tested at the local scale and then generalized. And out of that, we might see some huge potential changes, some radical shifts in the way politics is done in our country. And I'm combining it with what you and András were saying earlier about the crisis of the parliamentary democracy, the fact that neither the opposition, neither the ruling party has any confidence of the people. Where would you stand between these kind of two groups? Is it process-oriented, school for democracy in real time, or it has the potential to really change Serbia for good?
I consider it a fact that the movement is calling the political system into question. I don't see signs of calling the economic system into question, but the political system is being called into question. And if a political system is being called into question, that it seems to me that it's not valid to say that this movement just wants more of the same, that it's like really narrow, that it just wants the rule of law. Although if you analyze strictly if you stick strictly to the demands, the famous 4 student movement demands, you could say that they only want the rule of law. But since they are constantly challenging the political system, since they say everybody should organize direct democratically, it's not more of the same. Whether this can change the country, who knows? But I think it has, it certainly has the most potential in it so far. Like in the last decades, if you look at all the more mass movements we had, it seems to me that this has the most potential. We all know that it's very difficult to change these systems we have today around the world. But we do see a challenge, we do see mass support, and I really find it intriguing that in Serbia, there was a lot of effort invested into satanizing the direct democratic part of Yugoslav history, the socialist history, self-management, right? That people are all of a sudden receptive direct democratic organization. Now, it needs to be added that there is no defined vision. It's like we are going towards this new kind of society, which should be fill in the blank. We don't have that. And there is, if you look at the protest, the symbols in the protest, there are a lot of regressive symbolics present, like ethnic symbols, religious symbols. So, yeah, I would say that it's open, but that it is a challenge of the political system.
I have seen also at the protests like the flags of the Rohirrims, which is a kind of the fantasy dimension to it.
Yeah, in that respect, maybe even the Serbian flags and the Chetnik flags have a fantasy aspect to them. So it's like fandom, of theirs. it's really easy to call out the students protesters on the basis of their symbolics, and while having at the same time both direct democracy in practice for 5 months and also discussions between fractions in the students movement about whether they should go. Like it's also leftist in a way, because they discuss basically should they reform or revolutionize the system. So it's not something that we're not used to. The reformers are the ones who call for the expert government, and it's a part of the movement. And the ones who want to revolutionize are saying we can't have what we aim with just the reform. So it's the same. In that respect, from that point of view, it's also progressive, because nobody wants the status quo. I've been a pessimist about the outcome with the big O of this, the political outcome of these protests from the start, and at the same time optimistic and growing more optimistic about the subtle changes, like the cultural background, the changes in the culture, in the political culture of the society. I think that for a decisive blow on this regime, we would need to have much better organized trade unions, because there's been a push since December to have a general strike, and it's good that it's on the table and it's good that everybody wants it, but it's not going to happen.
Yeah, and this is also one of to just like round it now back to the beginning of our talk, coming back to the differences between the Milosevic moment. This moment, there is obviously like class and economic structure difference between the two historic moments in Serbia. So in the year 2000, we had the general strike. And probably the possibility of the general strike had to do with the fact that there were still remnants of the big Yugoslav corporations with a lot of workers who were chronically at that time underpaid, but who still constituted a more easily organizable and identifiable working class at the late 90s and around 2000. And then after the fall of Milosevic, the process of privatizing these old Yugoslav companies was rapidly realized. Most of them were just shut down and sold because of the real estate. And now, imagining something like an organized working class in Serbia is really difficult because of if nothing else, because of the way the economy is structured.
It's the same here in my country, with very weak labor unions, with very fragmented workers working on different contracts. Yeah, it's one of the challenges. I would like to, for my last question, I would like to move in a way our discussion from this. I feel it sometimes as a trap of the mainstream media reporting on processes only when you have huge events like protests. Like the last protest was in March, on March 15th of March, and with the largest one ever. Now, at least from outside, there is kind of nothing happening, but you mentioned that there is a lot happening on the ground. So what's next after this march? In meantime, there was this fire in Macedonia, and there was frustration there. And I've seen appeals from groups of citizens and initiatives in Macedonia in a way to create something similar, to be inspired partially by what is happening in Serbia. So what's happening? What next after the big protest on March 15th?
Well, in terms of things that can be present also in the mainstream media and that are viewed as battles, which is, I might say, kind of patriarchal, masculine way to. I mean, it's needed. But what you need for a battle to succeed, you need strategic planning, you need a lot of economic support, you need your free territory. You need medical equipment. You need all these things that are in contrast with the battle going on. The battle is just the peak of the iceberg. So in terms of these peaks of the iceberg thing, like these performed battles, we will have students protest on the 4th of April for Students' Day. We have ongoing protests and assemblies yesterday, today, who knows, where and when. We had more than 1,500 individual protests in March throughout Serbia. It's 1,496 or something. It's so huge. And then we will have a big protest in Novi Sad, which is a part of the country populated by Bosniaks, so by Muslim populations, which has for the first time, they say that they for the first time felt to be a part of this country. And same goes for ethnic minorities in Vojvodina. So this, I couldn't emphasize more the need to tread lightly around the critique of this symbolism of the protest, because while having a Serbian flag, this is for the first time a Serbian flag that unites and not discriminates in a long time. And then so it will be on the 12th of April. And then what I suspect will happen in terms of this like spectacular events such as protests and battles might be mobilization around Rio Tinto's Jadar project, which is probably going to be recognized as a strategic project by the European Commission in the following days. And since people supported the last wave of Rio protests against the project Jadar, so against lithium mining in Western Serbia, so 65% of the overall population is against it. I would say that this is something that might spark yet another wave of disobedience and possibly give the time for the part of the working class to somehow maybe try to organize, or these assemblies to amount to something bigger. Or if this doesn't happen, then this has been time space of liberty. And I don't think that we should fall into the trap of searching for the end of history in these protests. Like something will happen and we will live happily ever after, like in a fairy tale. Because like every woman knows, this doesn't happen like that. You need to clean your house every day. So I hope that in that respect we will have. This has been a period that will continue to be so influential that we cannot yet imagine in what ways.
I would just really shortly add on that from the other side, the government side. So far, up until let's say March the 15th, just to use some kind of reference point, the government was trying to use their their old textbook to counter this wave of protests and uprisals, which is, I would say that this textbook is written for the typical scenario when you have an anti-government opposition, and it wasn't working. It was they were making mistake after mistake. It just didn't resonate what the government was trying to do in order to counter the movement. And since March the 15th, although this is not quite correct, but just to use a reference point, it's visible that the government is slowly dialing up repression. So there are now more people in jail than there were before. There was on March the 15th, there was the use of this device. We don't know what the device is. We usually call it a sonic cannon. All the video material suggests the use of such a device, yet to be seen. What the truth behind that unfortunate event on the protest of March 15th. And other than putting people in jail, a lot of threats, right? A lot of thugs appearing in the protest, a lot of very, very, very dangerous sounding talk in government media about the shedding of blood, about a threat to the constitutional order. So we don't know yet what the extent of this future repression could be. And the other thing is what we cannot foresee from this point is the factor of exhaustion among the students, among the people. So at least these two factors are looming threat above the current political process.
Thank you very, very much for your comments, both pessimistic and optimistic. I would take the optimistic line here and would say that even the fact that this is happening, it's an amazing both experience, but also opportunity and occasion. It kind of also, something similar happening in Moldova, I would imagine will also get me very surprised, because I would also not expect it. And I would also be surprised that among this kind of generation that we consider depoliticized and a little bit interested, not in politics, but in Instagram, other things, self-centered and so on, somehow. But as you explained, it's not somehow, but there are social processes that feed somewhere in the underground interest to other practices of being together and what we are calling politics, but that are outside the formal politics. This was the Platzforma podcast. Thank you for listening. If you can afford, please consider the option of supporting us on Patreon. In any case, please like and share our content.